stories, trains, and magic? Well, you've come to the right place.
Funding for this program was also provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the financial support of viewers like you.
Reach for the speed, reach for the whistle, go where the rail may run. Reach for the words, reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun. To a shining time station, where dreams can come true, waiting there for you.
We have to do something, but what? That windstorm last night completely wrecked the early bird's nest. They need help, but how? Well, yes, I suppose getting all the other birds to stage a benefit concert would help, but would they do it? Who should I ask? Well, I know Skylark is a wonderful singer, but she'd never do it. She's so stuck up. You know who Skylark reminds me of? That silly snob of an engine, Sir Handel.
Skarloey and Rheneas work on the railway that weaves round lakes and along mountain sides. Their coaches are filled with visitors, and the engines are proud to run the line come rain or shine. Never let their passengers down, but they are old and they tire more easily. Their drivers understood this and they spoke kindly to them. There's more than enough work for both of you on this railway. The manager is sending 2 more engines to help us run the line. Skarloey and Rheneas were pleased with this news and promised to give the new engines a big welcome. When Sir Handel and Peter Sam arrived, they found they had much to learn. What a small shed, grunted Sir Handel. This won't do at all. We're much too good for this old shack. I think it's nice, said Peter Sam. Huh, replied Sir Handel. What's that rubbish? Shh, said Peter Sam. That's Skarloey. He's famous. And then he whispered to Skarloey. I'm sorry, Skarloey. Sir Handel's upset now, but he's quite nice, really. Skarloey felt sorry for Peter Sam. Now, Sir Handel, said the fireman, I will get you ready for work. I'm tired. Let Peter Sam go. He'd love it. No, you're first. Sir Handel puffed away to fetch his coaches. He didn't like the look of them at all. Whatever next? Those aren't coaches, they're cattle cars. Woo, screamed the coaches. What a horrid engine. It's not what I'm used to, clanked Sir Handel. He rolled to the platform just as Gordon arrived. Hello, who are you? I'm Gordon. Who are you? I'm Sir Handel. I've heard of you. You're an express engine. So am I. But I'm used to new coaches, not these cattle cars. Do you have new coaches? I see you do. We must have a chat. Sorry I can't stop. We must keep time, you know. Gordon was speechless. Clouds of steam filled the air as Sir Handel huffed and puffed along the line. He was still cross when they reached the top station. Sir Handel was hoping for a rest, but his driver thought otherwise. We'll leave the coaches now and fetch some cars from the quarry. Cars, snorted Sir Handel. Cars. I won't. So there. Sir Handel was about to cause a great deal of trouble. Told you, said Sir Handel. time workmen came to rescue him, Sir Handel was feeling rather silly. To make matters worse, there stood Sir Topham Hatt. His message to Sir Handel was brief and blunt. "I shall talk to you later." Then he and the fireman left with Peter Sam. Sir Handel felt sillier still. "Come on," said his driver. "Let's get you back on the rails." When Sir Handel crawled home, he found Sir Topham Hatt waiting for him. "You're a very naughty engine. I hope I can trust you to behave when you next come out of this shed." After hearing that, I'm sure Sir Handel will, aren't you?
I will call her. Give me a minute. I have to rehearse a bit. Skylark? I was wondering if you'd be so kind as to perform a song or two at a benefit concert to help the early birds? She hung up on me. Who does she think she is? I told you, someday that stuck-up Skylark will learn her lesson, just the way Sir Handel did.
Sir Handel is very proud of his big, sturdy wheels. They have broad tires and hold well to the rails, but they are unusual. One day, the other engines wouldn't stop teasing him. "Look at his steamroller wheels," they joked. "Be quiet," snorted Sir Handel. "You're jealous." "Don't worry," soothed Peter Sam. "The engines all teased me about my special funnel until they learned how useful it is." "Did you hear that?" huffed Sir Handel. "My wheels are special, like Peter Sam's funnel. I can go faster than any of you." Skarloey had a plan to make Sir Handel see sense. "With your grand wheels, Sir Handel," said Skarloey, "you're just the engine to tackle George." "Who's George?" "That steamroller over there," replied Skarloey. "Listen." The steamroller was making rude remarks about the engines. "Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Pull them up. Turn them into roads. Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Pull them up. Turn them into roads." "Don't worry," said Sir Handel. "Leave him to me. I'll send him packing. George will soon get a run for his money." Later that morning, George was at the level crossing. "Huh. You're Sir Handel, I suppose." Sir Handel was standing no nonsense. "And you, I suppose, are George?" "Yes, I've heard of you." "And I've heard of you. You swank around with your steamroller wheels, pretending you're as good as me." "Actually, I'm better. Goodbye." George chuffered on, fuming. Later that day, Sir Handel brought a special load down after the last train had gone. When he had reached the road, he saw George traveling home. Sir Handel tried to attract his attention. "Beep, beep, beep." George took no notice. There was barely room to pass. Sir Handel was cross. "Get out of my way, you great clumsy road hog." "I don't move for imitation steamrollers. You don't know the road. Get out of my way." Then there was trouble. "Ah!" cried Sir Handel. "That was your fault." "No, it wasn't. It was yours." Everyone was arguing about who was to blame. "Hello, hello, hello," said a policeman ominously. "And what's going on here?" This made everyone stop arguing. They set to work clearing up the mess instead. Next day, the workmen put up a fence between the road and the railway. Then they went away, taking George with them. Sir Handel thought he had made George go away. talked of nothing but steamrollers. Oh, dear, whispered Scarloey. He's worse than ever. I'm sorry my plan was no good. Never mind, said Rusty. We'll think of something else. But they had no need to do that. Some boys arrived instead. They pointed to the engine and cried, "Look, here's Sir Handel. He tried to race a steamroller, but the steamroller nearly beat him." Sir Handel never mentioned steamrollers now. I know she didn't really hang up on me because I didn't really call her. But imagine how I'd feel if she had. No, we'll have to get someone else to perform. What about Old Brown the Owl? That Who song of his is always a hit. We'll call it The Who, live in concert. He's not too advanced in years to do it. Remember how old Edward came through when James needed help?
One day, James had to wait at the station till Edward and his train came in. This made him cross. Late again! Edward laughed and James fumed away. After James had finished his work, he went back to the yard and puffed onto the turntable. He was still feeling very bad-tempered.
Edward is impossible,
He grumbled to the others.
he clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow, he makes us wait.
Thomas and Percy were indignant. Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day. Really, said James. I should like to see him do it. Next morning, James's driver was suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. All traffic halted, called the signalman. Then he told the fireman what had happened. Two boys were on James's footplate fiddling with the controls. Phew. They tumbled off and ran when James started. The signalman answered the telephone. Yes? He's here. Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope. What for? Wondered the fireman. Search me, but you'd better get them quickly. The fireman was ready when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and the rope. Good man, jump in. We'll catch him, puffed Edward. James was laughing. What a lark, what a lark, he chuckled to himself. Suddenly, he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. What shall I do? I can't stop. Help! Help! We're coming, called Edward. Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last, he caught up with James. Steady, Edward, called his driver. The inspector stood on Edward's front, holding a noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it over James's buffer. The engines swayed and lurched. At last, got him, he shouted. He pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. So, the old iron caught you after all, chuckled Edward. I'm sorry, whispered James. Thank you for saving me. You were splendid, Edward. That's all right, replied Edward. The engines arrived at the station side by side. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. A fine piece of work, he said. James, you can rest and then take your train. I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended. Oh, thank you, sir, said Edward. It'll be lovely not to clank.
I called Owl. He sleeps all day, but I got his answering machine. I left a message, but I doubt he'll show up. I suppose we could ask Cuckoo, but he's so cheeky. Cuckoo's every bit as cheeky as Thomas the Tank Engine.
It was a beautiful morning on the island of Sodor. Thomas the Tank Engine's blue paint sparkled in the sunshine as he puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. He was feeling very pleased with himself. Hello, Thomas, whistled Percy. You look splendid. Yes, indeed, boasted Thomas. Blue is the only proper color for an engine. Oh, I don't know. I like my brown paint, said Toby. I've always been green. I wouldn't want to be any other color either, added Percy. Well, anyway, huffed Thomas, blue is the only color for a really useful engine. Everyone knows that. Percy said no more. He just grinned at Toby. Later, Thomas was resting when Percy arrived. A large hopper was loading his freight cars full of coal. Thomas was still being cheeky. Careful, he warned. Watch out with those silly cars. Go on, muttered the cars. And by the way, went on Thomas, those buffers don't look very safe to me. The last load poured down. Help, help, cried Thomas. Get me out. Percy was worried, but he couldn't help laughing. Thomas's smart blue paint was covered in coal dust from smokebox to bunker. Ha ha, chuckled Percy. You don't look really useful now, Thomas. You look really disgraceful. I'm not disgraceful, choked Thomas. You did that on purpose. Get me out. It took so long to clean Thomas that he wasn't in time for his next train. Toby had to take Annie and Clarabelle. Poor Thomas, whispered Annie to Clarabelle. They were most upset. Thomas was grumpy in the shed that night. Toby thought it a great joke, but Percy was cross with Thomas for thinking he had made his paint dirty on purpose. Fancy a really useful blue engine like Thomas becoming a disgrace to Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Next day, Thomas was feeling more cheerful as he watched Percy bring his cars from the junction. The cars were heavy and Percy was tired. Have a drink, said his driver. Then you'll feel better. The water column stood at the end of the siding with the unsafe buffers. Suddenly, Percy found that he couldn't stop. The buffers didn't stop him either. Oh, wailed Percy. Help! The buffers were broken, and Percy was wheel-deep in coal. It was time for Thomas to leave. He had seen everything. Now Percy has learned his lesson, too, he chuckled to himself. That night, the two engines made up their quarrel. "I didn't cause your accident on purpose, Thomas," whispered Percy. "You do know that, don't you?" "Of course," replied Thomas, "and I'm sorry I teased you. Your green paint looks splendid again, too. In future, we'll both be more careful of coal."
So, that lets out Skylark, Owl, and Cuckoo. Is there anyone else to ask? Blue Jay? Surely you jest. You know what Blue Jay is. The bully of the neighborhood. You don't really think he'd offer to help the early birds, do you? All right, I'll ask him. But he'll never do it. Blue Jay's as mean as that Diesel.
Stepney's visit to Sir Topham Hatt's railway was coming to an end. "We shall miss you," said Sir Topham Hatt. Then he turned his attention to all the other engines. "My railway is very busy, and I'm pleased with you, but you need help. A diesel is all that's available. Please do your best to avoid any disturbances."
What does that mean? Whispered Duck.
That means this diesel is difficult.
Snapped James. And he was. The diesel surveyed the shed.
Not bad. I've seen worse. At least you're all clean.
The engines glared.
It's not your fault, but Sir Topham Hatt should scrap you and get engines like me. A fill of oil, a touch on the starter, and I'm off. No bother, no waiting. They have to fuss round you for hours before you're ready. The engines were furious.
Next morning, they held an indignation meeting round the turntable.
Disgraceful.
Disgusting.
Despicable. To say such things to us,
Cried Donald and Douglas.
is to teach them a lesson we'd be wanting. Now, how do we do it?
Their chance came sooner than expected. The diesel was purring comfortably. An inspector watched a fitter making final adjustments. The wind tugged at the inspector's hat. The diesel was ready.
Look at me, Duck and Stepney. Now I'll show you something.
He rolled proudly toward his coaches. Then it happened. Shaking and spluttering, the diesel stopped. Meanwhile, the inspector was looking for his hat. The diesel seethed with fury as Duck and Stepney pushed him back to the shed.
My hat,
exclaimed the inspector.
you sucked it through your air intake. Bother your hat. The heavy train's due out. You'll have to take it, Duck. Stepney, will you help, please?
Thank you, sir, cried Stepney. I'd like a good long run on my last day. The engines were soon ready.
Gordon will take over from halfway, so get the train to there. Good luck.
Don't worry, smiled Stepney. We'll get there, and be early, too. The cavalcade moved carefully over the rails and out to the open line. Now for a sprint, puffed Stepney. I'm ready when you are, replied Duck. Soon they were whizzing through Edward Station. And next they charged at Gordon's Hill beyond. They felt the drag of the heavy coaches here. It was hard work. At last they were running smoothly along the line toward the big station.
Hello, you're early, said Gordon. That's one in the headlamp for old Diesel.
James says he's sick as boiler sludge and sulking in the shed.
Serves him right for saying we're out of date.
And Gordon chortled away. Next day, everyone came to say goodbye to Stepney.
Come back and see us soon, whistled the engines. And you are always welcome on my Bluebell Railway, too, replied Stepney. Then he puffed away. And what about Diesel? He'd slipped out while no one was looking. But he left two things behind. A rather nasty smell and a battered bowler hat.
Just listen to that. Everyone we asked showed up to help the early birds. Fine feathered friends, that's what I'd call them. There's a lesson in this for all of us. I just can't think of what it is. Oh, I remember.